The doctor's instructions were clear. No trumpet, no performance, no physical exertion of any kind. His heart had been through enough. Louis Armstrong sat in his house in Corona, Queens, and listened to all of it. He nodded at the right moments. He thanked the doctor. And when the doctor left, he looked at the trumpet on the table and said nothing for a long time. 3 months later, he was on a stage at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, playing to a full room, and the sound coming out of that trumpet was Louis Armstrong at 70 years old. Still Louis Armstrong. Still that sound. Still that particular quality that existed nowhere else in the world. What it cost him to produce it, only he knew. And he didn't tell anyone. The story of Louis Armstrong's last years is a story about a man who'd been playing trumpet since he was a boy in a reform school courtyard in New Orleans, and for whom the trumpet was not a career instrument or an artistic tool. It was the thing his life had grown around, the reed through which everything passed. To tell him to stop playing was not a medical recommendation. It was a request to become someone else. He wasn't going to do that. He had his first serious heart attack in 1959. He was 58 years old and in the middle of a tour when it happened. He recovered, returned to performing, and continued. The doctors adjusted. The schedule was modified. Certain constraints were accepted. But the essential fact that Louis Armstrong performed live regularly for audiences did not change. By the late 1960 seconds, the body was showing what years of touring, playing, traveling, and the particular physical strain of trumpet performance had accumulated to. Playing trumpet is not a passive act. The embouchure, the precise muscle arrangement of the lips and face required to produce a sound on a brass instrument, involves sustained physical effort that increases exponentially at the upper register. Armstrong's playing, characterized throughout his career by high notes that had no business being as beautiful as they were, placed extraordinary demand on his cardiovascular system every time he performed. His lips had been a story in themselves. Over 50 years of playing, Armstrong had developed scar tissue on his lips from the constant pressure of the mouthpiece. He had techniques for managing it, preparations before performance, care afterward, and he had played through pain that would have stopped most musicians years earlier. By 1971, his lips and his heart were both carrying the accumulated weight of 70 years of living and 50-plus years of playing. In the spring of 1971, his doctors were direct with him. The heart could not sustain performance. Each time he played, he was adding risk that was not theoretical. They had numbers. They had evidence. They told him what the numbers meant. Armstrong had a specific response to this kind of information, a response that people who knew him recognized. He became very still. He listened completely, the way he listened to music, not waiting for his turn to talk, but actually taking in what was being said. And then he thanked whoever had told him and said he understood. He understood. He played at the Waldorf Astoria on the evening of March 1, 1971. The engagement had been booked well in advance, and Armstrong had decided he was going to fulfill it. The people around him, his wife Lucille, the musicians who had played with him for years, friends who knew what the doctors had said, watched him prepare for the show with a range of feelings that none of them knew quite how to express. What do you say to a man who knows exactly what he's doing and has decided to do it anyway? There is no argument available. The risk is not a misunderstanding. It is the point. He played for 2 hours. The audience at the Waldorf had not come expecting a historic evening. They came because Louis Armstrong was performing, which was always a reason to come. They saw a man who was 70 years old and not entirely well, who stood at a microphone with a trumpet and produced something that required them to sit still and listen with everything they had. Musicians who were in the room that night said afterward that there was a quality to the playing that was hard to place. Not diminished. Nobody would say diminished. Something refined. As if years of everything extraneous had been removed, and what was left was purely the essential thing. The note. The phrase. The breath between phrases. Nothing wasted. Armstrong came off stage and was visibly exhausted. His road manager, a man named Ira Mangle, who had been with him for years, said that Armstrong sat down immediately, loosened his collar, and took several slow breaths. Mangle said he looked at Lewis and saw something in his face that he hadn't seen before. Not pain, exactly. More like a man who had spent everything he had and was checking what was left. Mangle asked if he was all right. Armstrong said yes. He said the show was good. He asked if the audience had liked it. He never performed again. In the weeks that followed, Armstrong stayed at the house in Corona. He was weak in ways that couldn't be explained away or scheduled around. He sat in the kitchen in the mornings and sometimes played his reel-to-reel tape recorder, recordings of his own performances from earlier years, music he had made across 5 decades. Lucille said he listened with the same complete attention he always had. Not nostalgia, more like review. A man going back through the work and finding it satisfactory. He died on July 6, 1971, in his sleep, at his home in Corona, Queens. He was 69 years old. He had been up late the previous night, listening to music. His trumpet was buried with him. That detail appears in nearly every account of his funeral, and it carries the weight of the right decision. The trumpet was not a possession. It was not an artifact of his career. It was the most essential part of who he was, and wherever he was going, it was going with him. Dizzy Gillespie, who had known Armstrong for decades and had complicated feelings about him at different points in their shared history, said something at the time of Armstrong's death that has been quoted many times since. He said, "Know him, know me." 4 words. Gillespie didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He was saying that the entire world of music he had inhabited, the specific tradition, the specific vocabulary, the specific possibilities of jazz, had been built on a foundation that Louis Armstrong poured. Everything that came after, everything that had criticized him or departed from him or tried to move beyond him, had still been standing on that foundation. Armstrong knew what he was. He had always known. Not with arrogance. Arrogance and Louis Armstrong were incompatible, like 2 keys that don't fit the same lock. But with clarity. He knew what the music was. He knew what it asked of him. He knew, at the Waldorf in March 1971, what playing it one more time would cost. He calculated the cost and played anyway. Not because the cost was acceptable in medical terms. It wasn't. Because there are certain things a person cannot be asked to give up and remain themselves. The trumpet was that thing for Louis Armstrong. Without it, he was not in danger. Without it, he was not. He chose to be, all the way to the end. The trumpet went into the ground in July 1971. The music stayed up here, where it has been ever since. Some men don't stop because they can't. Some men don't stop because stopping would mean something worse than anything else they're facing. Louis Armstrong knew exactly which kind of man he was.